Hari Om, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Saturday Sutra night or Sutra Saturday night. I'm Tressa, and I am from Loving Kindness Reiki and Yoga in Clemens. So tonight, I'm so excited. I will send you all a handout of what I have, what I'm going over tonight, so that you can have that available. And so tonight, week one, what we're going to do is I'm going to go over basically what the Yoga Sutras are so that you can familiarize yourself with it if you're not already familiar with the Yoga Sutras. And then we'll go into the selected sutras for tonight, which are 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. So they all kind of go together. So those are the ones I'm going to go over tonight. And then I'll share some resources for you, some books, and some exercises that you can do after this presentation that you might be able to employ into your daily life. So without further ado. So the Yoga Sutras is the primary text of Raja Yoga, which is the mental science of yoga. It's because there's different disciplines in yoga, and like Hatha Yoga is more of the physical practice, and you'd be more inclined to see that in our daily culture because we do more of the physical practice. But Raja Yoga is the learning about the sutras and how that we can bring those into our life. So that is also a big part of integral yoga. If you're not familiar with integral yoga, it includes a whole bunch of different types of yoga like bhakti yoga, hatha yoga. So it includes the physical as well as the studies of the text. So that's what basically the Yoga Sutras are, and that's why they're so important, even though that they range anywhere. They're not really sure about how old they are, but anywhere from 5000 BC to 300 AD, so that's a big window. So they're really not sure about how old they are, but it just seems interesting to me how that they're so applicable in today's life and modern times, even though they are that ancient. It's pretty incredible. So they're really a way for a path for us to go through our life, plainly laid out. That shows us how we go through our practices, or it's basically the path that we go through, and eventually we get to the point where we're liberated from this body and the duality of being separate from the divine conscience. So once we go through that whole path, then we can contemplate. And it actually, the way that the sutras are structured, it has 4 padas or 4 chapters. And ironically enough, that starts with the end part of it as the first chapter. So pada 1 is the contemplation. We don't get into practice until the 2nd chapter. So it's just kind of interesting, but that's not uncommon for a lot of the ancient texts to be organized in a way that might seem different in the modern culture. So what does sutra mean? It means the barest thread. So I like to think of the sutras as a thread, and you think of it as like these beads here. So on this bead string, the string that is actually inside the beads holding them all together, that's the sutras. And then the beads are what we've learned throughout our life, through our teachings, through experience. So that's what's strung along the threads. So the Yoga Sutras are a guide, a structure for us to learn from, but our life is the beads. So we take little nuggets from everything that we experience and from what we learn. So there are about 196 Yoga Sutras. And like I said, they are divided into 4 different sections. The first one is the portion on contemplation. That's called Samadhi Pada. the portion on practice, which is sadhana pada, the portion on accomplishments, it's called vibhuti, which means negating and transcending earth-based consciousness. Wow, pada. And portion of absoluteness, or kavalya pada. So kavalya is that point where you're completely liberated from the non-duality. So you've become one with the divine conscious. So that's kind of a little bit of background about the Yoga Sutras. So Patanjali, they're really not sure if he was the only one that contributed to or commentated on these Yoga Sutras. It could have been other people, but they're not really sure. There's a lot of different myths and stories about Patanjali, so you can research that aside from this, and because the myths are pretty incredible and really interesting to read. So I highly recommend you dig deeper into some of the stories around his life. So let's get into the first sutra. And like I said, these are so meaty that, I mean, you could literally talk about these first few sutras until the cows come home. So we're going to go through the first sutra 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4, and 1, 6, because they all kind of go together. So the first one is Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. That's 1.2. What we like to think of this sutra is that this is the kind of the end goal of yoga. What do I mean by that? Well, if you look at the writings of Swami Satchidananda, he did a he commentated on the Yoga Sutras in this book, which is the one that I've used for, when I went through training. It's pretty dog-eared because I have this with me most of the time. But he says that this Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha is the restraint of the modification of the mind stuff is yoga. So again, the restraint of the modification of the mind stuff is yoga. Not standing on your head, not going into crow pose. No, it's the restraint of the modification of the mind stuff. And then Nishala Joy Devi, this is another nice one because this is kind of through a woman's perspective of the Yoga Sutras. But she says that yoga is the uniting of consciousness and the heart. So that's a lot right there. There's a lot to think about. So Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. So we're trying to restrain the modifications of the mind stuff. What does that all mean? Well, the thing is, if you don't have anything can cause vrittis, and we'll go into a little bit more about the vrittis and what they are. Those are the modifications. And the thing is, one of the biggest analogies is a lake. You have that nice smooth lake, and you can really see your true nature when the lake is nice and calm and clear. But any thought that comes through your mind, what happens is it causes a ripple. And eventually it gets to the point, especially if you're always going like that and you're never clearing or calming your lake down, is that you're going to forget who you are. You'll also forget that you are connected with the divine. You'll also forget that you're connected with all the other human beings in the world. There's a lot of forgetting. And that's all from those vrittis, all those little ripples in your clear, smooth lake. And that's what this sutra is really, really talking about. So it's a pretty heavy duty sutra. I mean, it's really what it really comes down to what yoga is really about. And like I said, it's not about the poses, although the physical practice does come into it. It's very important. But the thing is, when you can start to I don't know, control your mind so much as, but to kind of recognize what's going on and see where you can start to smooth that out on your own. Because the mind is a tricky place. The mind will lie to you. It will tell you a lot of untruths. It will get out of control sometimes. And so a really good practice is to check in with your heart. So see if your heart is lining up with what you're thinking in your mind. And in order to do that, you have to start to come to that place of stillness and where that lake is nice and smooth. And it's not easy. It's definitely not easy, especially in our culture, to get to that point because we're really a go, 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 go kind of society. So there's a lot of information coming in, a lot of stuff from social media, TV. We have our phones with us all the time. So that there's a lot of that ripples, all those things that can cause that lake to start to ripple and get away from us. So 1.2 is the goal of yoga. It is where we want to be, the restraint. And the thing is that word restraint is tough because it's really not restraint so much, but thinking of it this way. We're not trying to suppress the mind. We're just trying to reduce our point of focus. So instead of looking at all of the thoughts that come through our mind, what we're trying to do is find that focal point, that place that, and not necessarily get to the point where you're single focused, but that's the kind of the goal. But even if we can start to get to the point where we're not chasing all our thoughts and we're starting to bring our focus around a little bit. And like I said, it's really hard. We tend to, in this world, we just have so much thrown at us. So it's a difficult practice. But later on in the sutras, we do talk about how practice is important and that we need to be rigorous about our practice and not necessarily, we're not, again, talking about necessarily the physical yoga practice, but we're talking about the other practices of yoga. And next week we'll be talking about what those are. But practice means just showing up for life and recognizing what's going on and trying to be aware, wake it up. That's the best way to say it is we're trying to waken up a little bit. Okay. So 1.3 is the destination. So it says, Tada drashtu svarupe avashtanam. Then the seer or self abides in its own true nature. So once we restrain the modifications of the mind, then you can abide in your own true nature. That's Swami Sachinananda's version. Nishala Joy Devi says, united in the heart conscious is steadied, then we abide in our own true nature. And Nikolai Bachman, who's another one of my favorites, when it comes to the Yoga Sutras, he says, when the chitta vrittis no longer cloud perception, then pure awareness, or purusha, shines through and is experienced with oneself. So abiding in our true nature and that the divine consciousness, when we think about that. So we think about what's in our heart and who lives there. It's like that's our divine consciousness. And that's the one that we should be checking in with more often. And we can call that anything, whatever your words are for that. Spirit, God, Goddess, Buddha, Allah, whatever your words are for that. Or maybe you don't have words for that. That's the thing about yoga. It really does encompass all beliefs. Even if you're atheist, it doesn't matter. Whatever your true nature or that consciousness, it doesn't have to have a name. That's what's beautiful about yoga. It really is accessible to all people. So that's what 1.3 says. Again, once you've brought those modifications into a place where they're reined in a little bit, then you can start to connect with your true nature and also reconnect with the divine consciousness. Then in 1.4, what happens if you don't do that? What if you can't quiet down the modifications to the mind? Well, then Patanjali starts saying, well, vritti sarupyam ita ratra, which is the alternate. This is the alternate if we don't go the distance. At other times, the self appears to assume the forms of the mental modifications. So basically, if you start your lake again, think about your lake, and you've got all those ripples, and all those vrittis are going on, then what happens is if you don't calm those down, that you start to see yourself in those ripples. So you start identifying with those ripples. Let's see, Nikolai Bachman says, otherwise yoga or nirodha is not present and the mental activity is distracting the attention and blocking access to the inner light of awareness. So if we were drawn out of our awareness by what's going on around us or identifying with what we see, our peace fades. And that happens all the time. If you look on social media, that's one of the biggest things with disordered eating, or even yoga images of, people on rocks and in these crazy poses. And a lot of people don't feel compelled to come and try yoga because of what they see. It's real problem there. So identifying with what we're seeing starts to help us lose our peace. Also getting attached to the I ams. So all of the things we identify with. I am a yoga teacher. I am whatever. I am a doctor. I'm a mother. I'm a father. Whatever those I ams are. What that does is it starts to detach us from everyone else. And then that's where the separation happens. And we forget that we're all the same, that we all share the same light of awareness, and we're all connected. So that's what happens when we start to assume the form of other things we see around us. So that's the external part of it. And unfortunately, there's many people that happens to. So this is what the goals of yoga and why we do yoga is that hopefully we start to come back to that place of stillness. And we might just have glimpses of that for the longest time. But after a while, you get more aware. You start seeing a little bit of the light here and there. And then you start surrounding yourself by other people that have that ability. And that's where your spiritual community really starts coming in. So yoga helps us to shift our vision of what we see in the unity in all things. So to reiterate that asana is only one part of yoga. There's so much more to it. So moving on to 1.6. This is where Patanjali lists the 5 types of vrittis. In each of these types of vritti, they can either be painful or painless. So each of them could be like 2 sides of a coin. So there's pramana, viparaya, vikala, nidra, and smritaya. So the first one is correct or right knowledge. That's when the knowledge or the facts match the object. And the second one is misconception or incorrect knowledge. That's when the knowledge doesn't match the object. So oftentimes we use the analogy of you're walking down the hall and it's dark and you see something on the floor that looks like a snake. It's the old snake analogy, but it's true. So you're like, oh no, there's a snake on the floor. Oh no. And you get all freaked out. And then all of a sudden the lights come on and you realize it's a cane or a hose. That's incorrect knowledge or misconception. So that's the part where we start to learn how to discern what the truth is, because there's a lot of misconception coming into our thoughts. And it's where journaling really comes in in a big way. So we'll be talking a little bit more about journaling, and also having a person in your life or people in your life that you can bounce these ideas off of, these thoughts that you've had, to see, maybe talk it out a little bit to see if what you're thinking is the truth or if there's some misconception behind it. Next one is verbal delusion or imagination. So that one can get us in some trouble, but it can also be a good thing. So if you think of imagination, well, that's our creativity. That's maybe how we paint, or we write a story or something like that, or maybe play an instrument. So that imagination or that vritti can be very helpful. But it goes awry when you think about gossip or spinning the truth. And of course, we see that on the news a lot. And a lot of those ideas can be very hard to digest. And in another practice, and if you think of Ayurveda, which is the healing medicinal practices of India, and it's really the science of life, that even what we bring in through our senses is considered digestion. So if we're bringing in a lot of this misinformation, a lot of these, misconceptions, delusions, what have you, from media and from social media, that it could cause disease in our body because it isn't digested well. Too much of it is not good. So again, it's very helpful to have your journals to take care of how much you're digesting, and also have that spiritual community around you so that you can release some of this, talk about it, not keep it inside. The next vritti is sleep or nidra. So sleep, again, can be painless or painful. So painless is, well, it's the rest that you need. It's the time that you need to restore your body, restore your brain, take some time out, allow yourself to rest. However, on the other side of the coin is that nightmares, trouble with sleeping, that can be painful for a lot of people. Or if you're triggered, or if you're on guard. So people with trauma, past trauma, like myself, I've had panic attacks in the middle of the night because that was a trigger for me. So sleep isn't always a wonderful experience for a lot of people. It's something that some people need to learn and practice. So even having a guided meditation practice or yoga nidra practice can be a wonderful asset or part of someone's practice. So that's always an option if you have trouble sleeping. Because again, sleep is something that you, again, need to practice, and it might not come easy. So there might be some tools out there that you can work with through yoga, through other healing modalities such as acupuncture, Reiki, and other music. That's always a nice one too, is put on some nice music. So sleep, again, can cause those fluctuations in the mind. The last vritti is important too, is memory. Memories, again, can be painful and painless. So memories can be wonderful. You can remember spending some time with your grandmother, or maybe your wedding day or whatever, and that's really good stuff right there. But even that will cause a little bit of a ripple in your lake. So that'll even stir up some of that water. So even the good stuff can create that fluctuation. And then sometimes you can get into that point where you're nostalgic, where you're spending all your time in your memories. And they start to bog you down so that you maybe start disengaging from life. Or you have some really bad memories or hurtful memories. Well, again, that can pull you down into those depths as well. So yoga can help with that as well. So those are let's take a review of those sutras again. So 1.2 was Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. So that's your goal, because we want to start to rein in some of those modifications or those vrittis in the mind field. So we want to start to smoothen out our lake a little bit so that we can start to reconnect and reconnect with the divine consciousness and start to discover what our true nature is. And hopefully develop a really good relationship with that true nature. So that's the first part. And then the 1.3 is tada. Then, I love that word, tada. Well, that's where it comes from, right? Tada drashtu swarupe avastanam. So then the seer abides in their own nature. So once that lake is nice and calm, then we can start to see that inner line of awareness, that divine consciousness. Again, this might be just a glimpse, but it's beautiful. And we start to get in touch with our true nature. However, because there's always a warning, Patanjali says in 1.4, vritti sarupyam itaratra. That's a little bit better. So if you can't get to the point where your modifications are smoothed out, then you start to identify with the mental modifications. So you start identifying with the vrittis. And that's where we get in a little bit of a trouble. So we start identifying with them, and it's distracting us from finding what our true nature is and also reconnecting with the divine consciousness. And then in 1.6, he talks about the 5 types of vrittis: correct knowledge, misconception or incorrect knowledge, verbal delusion or imagination, sleep, and memory. So those are the sutras that we went over. So what I have is a little bit of homework for you to do. And then we'll talk about some of the books that I recommend here. So the first one, and of course these are all optional. All these homework ones are all not optional, but I thought that I would throw them out there for you. So the first one is journaling and an affirmation. So I invite you to start to tune in and become aware of what is disturbing your peace throughout the day. So you can make in your journal, you can make a little column or a little table that basically says, okay, this is what disturbed my peace. Maybe I got on social media and I saw a post and it freaked me out and I got mad. That disturbed my peace. Identify it and notice where you feel it in your body. Write it down. Take a moment, take a couple breaths, and say the affirmation, yoga is the uniting of consciousness in the heart. I abide in my own true nature. So that kind of brings you back to that inner light. Or you can just, at the end, just say, I abide in my own true nature. You want to keep it simple. So just thinking about whenever you become aware of something disturbing your peace. So again, I use that example of social media. It could also be, I'm hungry. I need to eat. Well, that's disturbing your peace too, because you're not going to be happy until you have food, or at least be able to quiet down the mind, because your mind's going to be, I'm hungry, I need food. I better get food. If I don't get food, then I'm going to be angry, or I'm going to start feeling dizzy, or I can't think. So I need to get food. Well, that's disturbing your peace because it's niggling. It's niggling in your head. So write that down. And after a while, you'll just kind of notice what's your patterns, or what you're thinking, or how it's affecting your body. So going back to the example, well, if you're niggling about food and being hungry, then you might be noticing it in your belly, let's just say. Or going back to the first example with the social media, well, maybe you saw that post and it pissed you off. Where did you feel it in your body? Well, I felt it in my shoulders. My shoulders started crinkling up and I got so mad. Well, there you go. There's another example. So just kind of thinking about that is basically what disturbed your peace, identify where it is, where it started landing in your body. And then say an affirmation. You can make up any affirmation, something that brings you back to a place of peace and centered. Being centered is very important. And the biggest thing is, just when you're doing these exercises, is to remember that not all the vrittis have a negative connotation. They can either bring pain or be painless, and to be gentle with yourself. Always be gentle with yourself. Check in. If you get triggered, then please contact somebody that can help you out. And so that's the first exercise. And the next one is another journaling exercise. So in this exercise, you want to think of a time when your preconceived notion or misconception has caused you to judge someone unfairly? So think about that. And what are some of the ways you can prevent this or stop it in its tracks? So find some tools that you can use to say, wait a minute, no, let's back this up. Let's slower roll here. So think about that time that I've done it myself. For example, I'll give you an example. I teach over Gym 365, at least before the pandemic. I taught a yoga class over there, and there was a young man that came into the class, and he looked like the gym rat. He was all buff and everything. And I teach mainly older adults. So I'm like, what in the world is he doing here? This big buff gym rat. Well, I had all sorts of stories going on about that poor man. And I'm like, what's going on here? And then I talked to him after class, and come to find out he has extreme anxiety. And he wanted to come to my class because he wanted some help with that he wanted to find a little bit of peace. It's like, I felt so horrible afterwards. But again, my misconceptions, I spent an hour with them, and they caused a lot of junk going on in my head. So how do you stop that in its tracks when you start seeing it? That can be tricky. I'll give you a clue though. One of the biggest thing is once you start tuning into this, into your heart, let your heart start to filter some of those thoughts and see what happens. So the next one is chanting the sutras. Probably never thought of that. Maybe you have. So you can practice chanting the chapters above, the ones that we went over today, along with the resources that I'll provide in this handout here. There's a lot of chanting resources for the Yoga Sutras on YouTube and on Spotify. So this is a really great way to start to incorporate the Yoga Sutras so you can start to embody the Yoga Sutras. It can also act as a japa practice. So it's a meditation practice that you can do even before you go to bed. It's a wonderful time to chant these sutras. So you don't have to do all 196 of them, but you can start to practice them. Take a little bit at a time. There is one resource on there that I'll send you that he basically goes over word by word, so you can start to learn the words. And then after he does the whole chapter 1, then he does it line by line. So it's call and response. So the power of chanting is incredible. I highly, highly recommend it. It's one of my main practices for meditation because it keeps me occupied. My mind really doesn't have a chance to do anything but focus on the Sanskrit words. Not to mention, Sanskrit is extremely healing to the body. It starts to tap into the nadis, the main energy channels of the body. It really does help to tune your vibration, starts to open up your chakras. So I highly recommend that. So chanting the sutras is a wonderful exercise. You can also get recordings of the sutras, and you can put them in your car so you can listen to them while you're driving. Start really incorporating those words into your practice. And you will be surprised that oh yeah, I've heard that word here or there. So the words can be very familiar. So it's a very powerful language, and like I said, it really does help to start to begin to heal the body. if you aren't comfortable chanting along to the sutras, just listening to them is really a balm for the soul. So I highly recommend that. Reaching out, the next one is reaching out, maybe finding a spiritual buddy in your community. So trying to find someone that's not necessarily a close friend. I highly recommend finding maybe someone that you're acquainted with rather than a best friend, because best friends are great, but you have all those memories, which again are Brittes. So maybe bringing in someone that's not, you don't have all that weight with, that you can start to really bounce ideas off of. And some of the best practices I wrote down here is that you set up some time to bounce thoughts and ideas with each other, and maybe talk about how your spiritual practice is going, and maybe get some feedback. Okay, what are you doing with your spiritual practice? And, you know, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think about that? Or something like that. Or just give yourselves enough time to kind of have the floor in equal proportions, so that, you know, there's no one getting more time than the other. And another best practice is to avoid complaining, because that's not what having a spiritual buddy is all about. It's about having someone that that's of like mind, that that you can really have as a sounding board and a partnership. I personally have been doing this for 3 years now with another energy practitioner, and it has helped me tremendously. And I think that's why I really gotten through some of these tough patches as well as I have, because I've had her in my corner, and she's had me in her corner. So we've really we're an ideal match as far as having that spiritual body. I highly recommend it, and I will be probably blogging about that in my next blog, because I do think it's an important idea. And I didn't come up with it, I'll be quite honest with you. I've been taking a Raja Yoga class every week with Swami Karunananda up at Yogaville online, and she kind of brought that up in our last discussion about the Yoga Sutras. It's about having a spiritual body, and I just loved it. So I thought I would present that to the community, because I think it's essential. I really do. I think it's essential that we have someone that we can reach out to. Yeah. So if you don't know anyone that you could pair up with, I would be more than happy to help you out as a resource to find that person for you. So maybe I could match you up with someone. All right. So finally, I'm going to share some resources for further study. So again, this is the big one right here. I have these all in a list here too for you, so they'll be on your handout. So the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. This is by Sri Swami Satchidananda, who's my guru. So I highly recommend that. He has some nice little stories in here so that you can kind of remember the teachings a little bit easier. So he makes it very accessible. And there's like a ton of Yoga Sutra commentaries out there. And then there's Nishala Joy Devi. This is the secret power of yoga. So this is more of a woman's guide to the heart spirit yoga sutra. So it makes it more accessible and to women. So this is a very nice version of it. Yeah, I really like that one. And here's now Nikolai Bachman. He has this kind of a condensed version of, they're more of ideas from the Yoga Sutras. He does have a bigger box set that he actually has a workbook for going through the Yoga Sutras, which is amazing. And because he's a real scholar, Sanskrit scholar, and his teachings are pretty amazing. But this is a really nice little guidebook here, so that if you need to quickly touch on a subject, this is available. And it has some exercises in there as well. And this big boy right here is the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and that's by Edwin Bryant. And this is a big boy. This really digs into so many different points of view about the Yoga Sutras, so it's a really good resource. And he has at the back, in one of the appendix parts here, he has all the sutras in listed, so that you could chant along with that. And they're written in such a way that you can pronounce them easier. So if you're listening to a recording of the chanting of the Yoga Sutras, you can just kind of go right along with it. So this is another really great resource. Okay. So those are 3 books. Again, there's a ton more out there. Those are the ones that I thought I would present to you, because Nikolai Bachman is a wonderful resource for anything when it comes to the Yoga Sutras or chanting in general, because he's like amazing with that stuff. So you can check out his website. There's a lot of chant resources and downloadables. So I would highly recommend that. So next week, I'm going to be talking about the 8 limbs of yoga, which are basically an outline to living in the world and living with yourself. So that's what I'm planning on going over next week. And again, I will have handouts for you as well, because I think it's helpful, because there's so much stuff here thrown at you that it's nice to have a little idea about what we went over, so you can have that as a resource. And so what we'll do is we'll close. And so I invite you to sit nice and tall. And if you're sitting on the floor, then just begin to settle into your seat. You can also lie down in Shavasana. If you're lying down in Shavasana, just let your arms come out to your sides, have a little space between your arms and your body. Your palms are up. Allow your feet to drop to the side and let your body relax. If you're sitting, then again, sit with your feet on the floor. You have connection to the earth. Your hands can be palms up or palms down onto your thighs. Allow your spine to be tall. Shoulder blades are coming back towards one another. The tops of your shoulders are soft. Your head is balanced over your shoulders. So for the next couple minutes, we're going to allow all those teachings to start to come into our body, absorbing all that new information, new insights, and allowing them to come into our body, digesting and processing.
Bring your attention back to your space, deepen your breath, and move in any way that feels appropriate for you, starting to bring life back into your body. Start to increase your prana. And then if you're in Shavasana, then you can slowly make your way up to a seated position. If you're sitting, then go ahead and slowly open up your eyes and return your gaze to the room. So I figured tonight we will end with an Om, 3 Shantis, and an Om. Shanti is a Sanskrit word for peace. So we'll be sending peace to ourselves, someone that we love that might need some peace in their life, and then we'll send peace all over the world. So 1 Om, 3 Shantis, and an Om. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. I wish you light, love, happiness, and peace. All blessings to you. Thank you for joining me tonight.